Hi everyone, I am Dr. Stephen Lazer, Associate Teaching Professor at Arizona State University. I specialize in the political, institutional, and criminal history of early modern France and Germany. I teach a number of lower division and upper division courses that fulfill both general studies and history major requirements, including those you see here. In this video, we are discussing the thesis. The thesis, made up of the thesis statement and the roadmap, are the two most important sentences in your paper. The thesis tells the reader the paper's argument, what you are trying to convince the reader of, why it matters, and the paper's process. Essentially, the thesis frames the whole paper much like a topic sentence frames a paragraph. A good thesis piques a reader's interest and makes them want to keep reading. It also, with the roadmap, places into the reader's mind what is coming. Since the reader knows your argument, they will then look for that while they read the paper. The points you make in the paper's body become that much more clear and more convincing. The thesis frames the paper for your reader. It also frames the paper for you as you write it. Looking back to your thesis will help keep you on track, which is especially important for a paper that answers a given prompt. Therefore, the thesis is the first thing you should write for your paper. Knowing what your paper is about will help you write it, as you can look back at your thesis statement and make sure you don't go too far off topic. The thesis is the first thing you write and should also be almost the first thing your reader reads. People want to read things that are interesting, and they want to know why they are reading it. So tell them. You're not writing a murder mystery, dropping clues for the reader to collect as you build up to the big surprise. These are not clickbait articles with titles like, "And you won't believe what happened next," or recipe websites that drone on and on endlessly about absolutely nothing before telling you that you need 3 fewer garlic cloves than you actually need. You're already rolling your eyes at me right now because you know how infuriating these practices are, right? So don't do them in your work. Get to the point. In short papers, and the vast majority of college papers count as short papers, your thesis should be clearly stated by the end of the first paragraph, and the first paragraph should be short. Do not open your paper with gigantic block quotes, romantic expositions, or vague, fluffy nonsense about some tangentially related thing. Get to the point. There are 3 primary pieces to a thesis. First, the topic. Second, the argument. Third, the roadmap. Together, the topic and argument make up the thesis statement, the first sentence. The roadmap fleshes it out, and now your paper would be ready to go. The topic is the easiest part of your thesis, especially if your instructor gave you a prompt to write on. The prompt is your topic. We run into trouble when we forget that the topic is not the same thing as the thesis. The topic is not the argument. This mistake is perhaps the biggest pitfall I see in otherwise excellent papers regarding theses. Theses that falsely treat the topic like the thesis can look like this. This paper explores sub-Saharan feminism in the post-colonial 20th century. This paper considers the role of indigenous religious figures in resisting Spanish forced conversion to Catholicism. This paper seeks to answer the question of how changing Chinese dynasties affected the Japanese economy. These are all fascinating topics. None of them is a thesis. None of them actually tell the reader what the paper's argument is. What are you saying about sub-Saharan African feminism? How did dynastic change affect Japan's economy? Your thesis has to have an argument about the topic. Indeed, the argument is the single most crucial aspect of your thesis, far more than the topic itself. To avoid writing a thesis that is a topic without an argument, I recommend starting your thesis statement with the simple phrase, "This paper argues." Now you just have to finish that sentence. An argument is more than just a statement of purpose. An argument engages with a complex, debatable question that can be answered in multiple ways. For example, in a class on witchcraft, writing, "Women were more likely to be accused of witchcraft" is a poor thesis for 2 reasons. First, it's not really debatable. This is common knowledge. Second, the next sentence would be that 80% of accused witches were women, a citation for the statistic, and that's it. Paper over. A strong thesis on this same topic might start, early modern Europeans were more likely to accuse women of witchcraft because, and then list the reasons. Another example, the United States landed astronauts on the moon before the Soviet Union did. That is just a chronological fact. There's a topic, but no argument. The United States landing astronauts on the moon first fundamentally changed Cold War politics due to new perceptions of which superpower was technologically superior. Okay, now we have a thesis statement. Your argument should also be specific. You cannot cover everything on a topic well in a short paper. There's simply not enough space. Overpromising in a thesis, which I see often, inevitably leads to one of two outcomes. First, the paper tries to cover everything, meaning there's not enough space to analyze it, so it remains superficial. Second, the paper focuses on a few specific elements of the topic, as it should, but the paper's thesis is now incorrect. If you are struggling to develop a strong thesis statement at first, that's okay. If you are in a class with assigned prompts for your papers, the simplest way to write a strong thesis is just to answer the prompt directly. I do not mean simply turn the prompt's question into an answer. That is how we get "this paper explores" type language that doesn't have an argument. I mean answer the question that the prompt is asking you and then explain how you plan to go about answering it. If that does not work for you, if you're not actually sure yet how you plan to go about answering, I have another tactic for you on that, but that comes later on in the video. Let's shift to the roadmap. The roadmap may seem like an afterthought, and it is unfortunately often treated like one, but it is actually a really important second step that finishes off the thesis. Remember, the thesis statement tells the reader the paper's argument and importance. The roadmap tells the reader how you are going to get there. What are your paper's main topics or themes? Those go in the second sentence. Example, this paper argues that the Western Roman Empire fell due to many factors acting in tandem. There's your thesis statement. To do so, it engages with a number of challenges the late empire faced, including disease, corruption, and military incursions, before showing how the negative impact of each heightened the impact on the others. And there's your roadmap. Or a simpler one, perhaps. This paper argues that vanilla ice cream is the best flavor. To do so, it discusses vanilla ice cream's popularity, texture, and price compared to other flavors. And that's it. The roadmap is a microcosm of the paper itself and should be easy to create. You can write your first draft's roadmap directly from your outline. The final draft roadmap, however, needs to reflect the paper you actually wrote. Let's go back to the thesis now. Despite everything I've said in this video, it is actually fine, indeed perfectly normal, to have a weak thesis in your first draft. We often only have a vague idea of what we're actually doing when we start out. Writing is a form of thinking, and our writing takes us in new directions we did not originally anticipate. And the paper written is usually quite different from the paper we imagined. That's completely normal, and it's actually usually a good thing, as the connections we discover and make while writing invariably improve the finished product. Consider this process. We wrote our thesis, we tried to make it strong, but we weren't really sure what we were doing. We said the paper explores something, or that it was going to cover something. And why not? At that moment, we were just exploring. We wrote a roadmap based on how we intended to organize the paper at the time. Now let's skip to the end of the story. We finished writing and edited, yes, edited, the body of our paper, and it is strong. Great job. Now, erase your introduction and rewrite it. Remember when I said your thesis is the first thing you write? That's true. The thesis is the first thing you write. The thesis is also the last thing you write. As I said, the written paper is different from the paper you originally imagined, and you wrote your initial thesis for the imagined paper. So now you have to rewrite your thesis to fit the paper you actually wrote. I have found that a lot of students struggle with this concept, rewriting the introduction. And because of that, I have seen countless introductions that simply don't match the rest of the paper because the author wrote an introduction and that was that. But having an introduction with a thesis that doesn't fit the paper that ended up being written is jarring, and it immediately tells the reader that the editing process was haphazard. The reader will have a harder time following the paper's argument if it does not have the clear framing provided by a good thesis. Often, the conclusions to these papers, written last and thus after the author figured out what they were trying to say, work far better as introductions than unedited introductions. If you still struggle after these practices with developing a solid thesis, read through your paper, talk out loud to yourself. Talk to a patient friend about your paper's main point. You might find a thesis in your attempts to explain yourself orally. Then check how you organized, how you wrote your paper, and use that to generate a new roadmap that accurately fits the paper you wrote. So just like you write an introduction to help you figure out your paper and to help your reader figure out your paper, you can also let your paper help you figure out your proper introduction.